Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Incarnated and disincarnated, who's here with us on this beautiful second day of December. We welcome everybody who's here in spirit, sitting here, and those that are watching us live on YouTube. We welcome everybody. As some of you may know, this is Becerra de Meneses, and we're a nonprofit 501c3, which means that we function strictly through donations and volunteers, and that our mission is to study Spiritism and to promote the practice of spiritual and material charity. Our phone number is 305-477-4148. If you would like to find out additional information, you're welcome to go to our website, www.spiritist.com, or you're welcome to send an email to info@spiritist.com. And as we said, we do transmit live on YouTube, so we ask you to silence or turn your cell phones off, please. The way that you can listen to our Gospels is by logging on to www.youtube.com/Becerra Miami, and you can see past Gospels as well as the ones that are going to be coming in today at 11:30. As we said before, we function through donations, and we thank you all for your donations of time, not just monetary. Our Radio Becerra functions through radio.spiritist.com and their podcasts, where you can listen to Spiritist themes and topics in English, Spanish, and Portuguese 24/7. You simply log on to www.spiritist.com and select whatever pod you want to listen to. Maybe you want to hear English, Spanish, or Portuguese, whatever. We're blessed to be able to read from our daily bread by our dear Francisco Candido Javier, that we lovingly call Chico Javier, and he speaks to us through the spirit of Emmanuel. And in today's chapter number 114, he tells us about the new Athenians. But when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We will hear you again regarding this matter." And this is in Acts chapter 17, verse 32. Paul's contact with the Athenians on the Areopagus represents a very interesting lesson for new disciples. As long as the apostle was commenting on his impressions of the famous city, perhaps stoking his listeners' vanity by referring to their sanctuaries and subtly playing upon their reasoning, they listened attentively. It is possible that they would have praised him fervently if he had stuck to his initial philosophical viewpoint. Athens would have reversed him as a wise man, presenting him to the world in the special mold of his unforgettable figures. Paul, however, went on to refer to the resurrection of the dead, giving them a glimpse of the glorious continuation of life beyond the trifles of earth. From that moment on, the audience started to feel uncomfortable and scoffed at his loving and sincere words. In the end, they left him practically alone. This example fits in perfectly with what happens nowadays. Within the various areas of modern culture, numerous workers for Christ are listened to attentively and are respected by the authorities on the subjects of their specialty. But when they openly declare their belief in a life beyond the physical body, as they affirm the law of responsibility beyond the grave, they immediately receive scoffing laughter from the admirers of a minute before, who leave them at once with the impression of a real, genuine desert. So for reflection about today's reading. In today's reading, Emmanuel mentions how the people in this city in ancient Greece loved to hear him when he referred to the city's great sanctuaries, but how they mocked him when he began to talk about the resurrection of the dead, even though some expressed interest in hearing more about the subject. This still happens in our society and churches in different places. Christians are respected by their leaders for the work they do. But as soon as they declare their belief that life continues after the body dies, they immediately receive laughter and rejection from those that admired them a minute before. We belong to the group that responded, "We will hear you again regarding this matter." So after reflecting on those words, let us join our thoughts. Let us take a breath. Let us thank our Creator and our loving best friend of all times, Jesus, our perfect role model, our dear Dr. Becerra de Menezes, our spiritual guides and our mentors, all those spirits that so lovingly came and prepared everything for us so that we could come today and listen to the gospel according to Spiritism. We ask you, dear Lord, to please bless our sister, Andrea Marshall Neto, so that she can give us the message in its purest form with her loving, gentle, kind ways. And we take advantage, dear Lord, and also ask blessings for her partner, her best friend, Marcelo Neto, and the entire Federation of Florida and all the workers of our doctrine. We ask you, dear Lord, that you look down upon us and that we may always love you above all things and our neighbor as ourselves. And all these things, dear Lord, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So it's with great joy and happiness that we present our dear Andrea Marshall, who's going to speak to us about the workers of the last hour. I was going to say that in my prayer. I was going to say, we the workers of the last hour, because we're given a last chance. Andrea.
Thank you, Maggie. Well, good morning to everyone who follows us, who are here, incarnate and discarnate. It's always a great pleasure every time I come here because we feel like we are in the midst of family. And the Bezerra de Menezes Spiritist Center in Miami is a very dear one to us. We always think about Benjamin and the family that is still here doing the work, and truly full of merit for the title of Workers of the Last Hour. And the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is what this chapter is from, chapter 20, gives us some reflection on the importance of this chapter. Because in the beginning of the reading done by Maggie, one of the sentences that Emmanuel brought talked about a sense of the law of responsibility beyond the grave. And when we consider ourselves as spiritists, which we do here at the Spiritist Center, it's unavoidable to start considering about this law that governs both sides of life. And if there is a law of responsibility beyond the grave, and we know about the fact that this is a temporary phase that we live in, the physical world, it's truly important that now more than ever, we start considering about this matter. As we know, Jesus spoke in parables as to make things a little bit easier for people at its time to understand his teachings, his lessons. There is a very interesting point in one of the dialogues with the disciples later on, after having brought many of the parables, in which he tells the disciples that for some people he speaks in parable because it's a way to make others understand, to reach their level of spiritual consciousness as to grasp the message behind each lesson. But for them, it had come to a point where he could speak to them directly. And I believe, for one, that Spiritism as the promised consoler is as if Jesus is back again speaking directly to us and no longer in parables. And when we have the Gospel according to Spiritism bringing us lessons of the parables, we have in the presence of benevolent spirits explanations such as we find in the Spirit's teachings, where they bring us explanation on what does it mean to be the last, being the first, the mission of Spiritists and also workers of the Lord. as we have in this chapter here. So here is the parable found in Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. The kingdom of heaven is like the father of a family who went out at daybreak in order to hire workers to work in his vineyard. Having agreed with the workers that he would pay them 1 denarius per day, he sent them to the vineyard. He went out again at the 3rd hour of the day, and seeing others who were in the square not doing anything, he said to them, "You go also to my vineyard, and I will give you what is reasonable." And they went there. Again, he went out at the 6th and 9th hours of the day, and he did the same. And having gone out at the 11th hour, he found others who were without anything to do, and said to them, "Why have you stood around all day without working?" They told him that it was because no one had hired them. He then said to them, "You too go to my vineyard." So that we can understand a little bit about this, to know about the culture and the time of Jesus, the day would begin at daybreak, consisted of starting at 6 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m. So it was a 12-hour day of labor. So the 6 a.m. represents the first hour. When it talks here, having gone out into the first hour. The owner of the vineyard, as used by Jesus, can be explained as our Father. That's the owner of the vineyard. And vineyard is the place of labor in which one would find oneself. Today, we can clearly see that the vineyard is pretty much wherever we find ourselves in. Whether we have come from Colombia, Brazil, Cuba, wherever the case may be, wherever we have been stationed to flourish is where the vineyard is. It is where we have the tools to plow, to crop, to later on collect whatever it is that we have been able to work on. So the parable explains that at the 3rd hour, or rather at 9 a.m., if 6 a.m. is the first hour, the 3rd hour would be 9 a.m., 3 hours later. We see that the owner of the vineyard went out and saw that the workers weren't doing anything. So then there is another calling. It's interesting because the entire parable is about a calling, and it's something that most of us don't pay attention to. Have we been receiving callings only in this life or many lives? And that's what we're going to consider. So the vineyard, the worker not doing anything, were invited, and they were told that they would receive a reasonable pay for their work. At the 6th hour, rather at noon, at the 9th hour or 3 p.m., he went out and did the same thing. And then Matthew here talks about how he went out at the 11th hour, rather at 5 p.m., which is the last hour before completing the work of labor. If it had 12 hours, the last hour would be the 11th hour. And then found people sitting around doing not anything. Why are you sitting around not doing anything? Well, because nobody had come to hire us. And so they were invited again to work in the vineyard. Henry, the benevolent spirit, tells us that as workers of the first hour and the last hour, we are going to find included the group that were composed of Moses, the prophets, and all of the initiators who marked the stage of progress that has been continued down through the centuries by apostles, by martyrs, the church fathers, learned individuals, philosophers, and finally, spiritists. And if we consider how blessed we are as spiritists on the 21st century, we find that an entire group of people have left us an inheritance, if you will, of knowledge, of things that have prepared us to come to the 21st century as a spiritist with a body of knowledge that entails philosophy, science, and religion, not only to point us towards the way of spiritual progress, but also that gives us a glimpse of the kind of individual and collective responsibility that we have towards making this vineyard a most successful, full of crop one, if you will. Whether it's for us who are here already or those that are coming after us. In the Spiritist Center, we know that there are spirits watching, partaking, getting ready, being encouraged to start a new incarnation. And so when we are here preparing the soil, sometimes people will say, the work of the Spiritism is very small compared to what we see happening in Brazil. But it needs to start somehow, somewhere. And how we carry on the work to make it flourish and make it a big boom to resonate to the rest of the world is truly going to be up to each one of us. So we are at the Spiritist Center, and usually the work of the Spiritist begins at the Spiritist Center in very small tasks that collectively becomes a great one when we put it together. So we know that we have people that only prepare the little tiny waters for the pass, the magnetized water for the passes. And at their center, we know, oh my God, that's all I do. And they feel so discouraged. But when they're absent and nobody has put the little water out there, it makes a big difference. So the work of the Spiritist begins at the Spiritist Center, but it doesn't end when we leave the door. And that's something that a lot of Spiritists are not considering. So this inheritance of those who came before us, Henry tells us that it's a collective result and that God operates in the spirit of solidarity. When I was rereading this chapter, because we've usually opened a few times the gospel and it has landed on this one, it's actually my husband's favorite item, the mission of the Spiritists. He really loves reading about that, and it's as if it's a reminder of the kind of responsibility that we have been given prior to reincarnating. He tells us that in order for us to reach the state of knowledge that we have to count on those that came before us. So when we talk about workers of the last hour, who are we talking about? The Spiritists only? Erastus and the Gospel according to Spiritism gives us a message. Good Spiritists, my dearly beloved, you are all workers of the last hour. The one who says, I began work at daybreak and I will finish only at nightfall, would be very proud. You all came when you were called, some a little earlier, some a little later, to the incarnation whose shackles you bear. However, for how many centuries has the Lord been calling you to his vineyard without your wanting to enter it? Good Spiritists, he doesn't talk about people that are doing lectures, giving passes, participating in the Spiritist Center directly, but those that have adopted the philosophy to try to better themselves. Good Spiritists, as if to say, faithful ones. Those that are trying to overcome their own obstacles and frailties of the soul and develop. We're talking about Spiritists as being the workers of the last hour because that's where we are today, ourselves, in this time, appointed time of our lives. But many of us have come from Catholicism, from other type of religions that gave us a solid ground to step on. But there are other philosophies also out there that are doing a beautiful work in trying to complete the task. We have this discussion often at the Spiritist Center where we are. Is Spiritism the owner of the truth? The only truth? But is it a very blessed one that we have chosen? Indeed it is. I came from from a background where I was exposed to other philosophies that it's not needed to mention here right now. But I remember Spiritism being something that it was as if a beacon of light shone very bright inside my soul at a very early age, where it just made sense in talking about the things that happen throughout our existence, the things that happen prior to being here that leads us to believe that there are no longer victims in society. The kind of knowledge that tells us that unless we are able to modify a bit of whom we are going to continue repeating the lessons until it is learned. And through a vision of reincarnation, it's when we are really able to understand how this lesson is actually going to truly be established within our hearts and make a modification. The book Jesus in Our Days psychographed by Divaldo Franco, and the spiritist Joanna de Angelis, states that Jesus brought the law of reincarnation in many of the lessons of the Bible, and a lot of people question whether reincarnation was accepted during Christ's time. And if we read about it, it was. When we see about the fact that we shouldn't be speaking to spirits and the aspects of mediumship, and that it is prohibited by Moses, Christ came to show us that Moses wasn't incorrect in trying to prohibit the communication with the dead or the discarnate spirits, because people were abusing the faculty back then for frivolous activities. But he actually had a communication with the spirits. And when the disciples also spoke in different languages, it showed us another manner of manifestation of mediumship. Spiritism explains all of that. And it is also a Christian body of knowledge. And this is just something that we need to understand here. The parable has a very profound meaning for us because it designates the place in which we must work. We must also see that we have obligations that have been given to us that we cannot avoid or ignore or pass on to anyone else. That is ours. It's unique to each one of us. Now, if I were to ask a teenager, what is your meaning of life and what is your mission in life? Perhaps they might not yet know. But when we consider ourselves that we are no longer in the teenage phase of spiritual knowledge, we should be able to see the kind of obligations that each one of us have. We have a beautiful example when a daughter gives up a lot of her social life to take care of the one who took care of her when she was a little girl, when she takes care of her mother. We see the kind of obligation when spiritists of the Spiritist Center carry on work that have been established for like over 30 years, such as Bezerra de Menezes. It's an obligation. We see people that have been given their lives in the benefit of others while also tending to their own selves. It's a sense of obligation. So it's a very private and individual matter, but it's something that we can't ignore. So the good spiritist is the one who, according to Henry, sacrifices often. What is the state of sacrificium? Is it like the early Christians being devoured by beasts? Today, we don't have to do that anymore. The kind of sacrifice is even deeper because it has to do with sacrificing the things that still holds us back. And the beast that we hold internally, pride, vanity, all of that, is actually greater in trying to give testimony to Christ than being devoured by a beast as it was done 2,000 years ago. It's a new era. It's a new state of mind. And so Divaldo Franco stated once that one of the things that deviate us from our path, from our obligation, from our responsibility, is the glitz and the lights of the illusions that the world offers often. So we see a mega beacon of light ahead of us, which is Christ, shining bright. It's dark, but we see it. We are able to see it. Because in Spiritism, we are told by the benevolent spirits that we have Jesus as the model, role model, guide for humanity. And if we should just try to follow his steps, not perfectly because we're not there yet, but make an active effort to follow his steps, we will reach a spiritual progress more and more, incarnation by incarnation. But Divaldo says that there are flickering lights of illusions to the side, and that's where we get distracted. Godinho, the president of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, states the same. We're walking, there's a path, but all of a sudden we look to the left or to the right and we see the little glitz, the little lights. He calls them fireflies. And so we go after, like children would do, because it's more enticing. It's more enticing because it actually fulfills things that we have inside for millennia, for many centuries. And so what they're telling us to do is to make an active effort to stay focused on truly what matters and what means to us. It is not that the good spiritist doesn't have quality time away from their studies and the work and the Spiritist Center. That's not what we're trying to say. But it's also in a state where while we are having also quality time, social time, we are also putting in practice what Francis of Assisi stated once. He told us to preach the Gospels at all times, but only use words when it's necessary. So we wanted to address this because Erastus encourages us to go out and disseminate Spiritism, talk about it. Talk about the immortality of the soul, about the nature of reincarnation, about the law of cause and effect, about the inequalities that we see on earth. He tells us, he says, go out, disseminate the body of knowledge, but make sure that you're making an effort to live by it. And that's the problem that we see today. Social media can be a very positive, powerful tool, but it can also be one that is damaging, especially when we place ourselves as representatives of a Spiritist philosophy, but on social media, screamingly, we act completely opposite, disseminating hatred, scandals. Who curses at the Spiritist Center? No one. So why do we curse out there, out of the Spiritist Center? We were at an event one time in Cuba where a certain situation took place. It was a Spiritist event, and there was a political manifestation in the middle of the event. And when Divaldo came to Miami, he was going to be attending an event right after that situation took place. He had to address people because he said, politicism doesn't find its way in Spiritism. Because political party parts, that's what it does. So when we see people manifesting their ideas in a very aggressive way, it's not to say that we cannot give our opinions online. That's not what we're saying. But when we aggressively partake on one side or another, we divide. And Spiritists shouldn't do that. We should be uniting, believing that things are under control, that we do our duty as citizens, as civilians, but we also maintain a state of peace. So we are Spiritists in the center and outside of the Spiritist center. I can see an easy and love her and hug her when I come in here. But when I go home and I bash my children or my husband in a state of not fraternal assistance or counseling, what does it matter what I'm doing at the Spiritist center if it's not making an impact inside, outside of the Spiritist walls? How are we partaking in the betterment of the world if we are not applying the teachings that we receive in the Gospels? We're not saying this to bring anybody down, because we do great things, but it's just an alert that they're bringing us. Why? Because the time has arrived when the divine light will be shed over the two worlds, the visible and the invisible. Get to work. The plow is ready. The soil awaits you. Now you must work. So we've been invited. We were sitting around idle. The owner of the vineyard came and said, Leo, why are you not working? And he said, well, nobody hired me. So he's been invited to work. I love picking on some people at the center. It's so much fun. So he says, go. And then there is a question. If many of those called to Spiritism have gone astray, but what signs do we recognize those who are in the righteous path? Leo even changed places. Don't worry, I see you. How do we recognize who is the faithful Spiritist, the good Spiritist as appointed by Henry and Erastus? And the answer is right here. You will recognize them by the principles of true charity that they profess and practice. You will recognize them by the number of afflicted to whom they take consolation. You will recognize them by their love for their neighbor, their selflessness, and their personal disinterestedness. You will recognize them finally by the triumph of their principles, for God wills the triumph of his law. Those who obey his laws are the elect, and he will give them victory. What is the aspect of practicing and professing charity that they see here? Charity is understood by Christ, benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. Forgiveness is a road, it's a journey. We've read that in the book, Forgiveness as the Way, and The Way to Forgiveness is a book that has been translated by Alberto Almeida, who's a transpersonal psychologist. And he tells us sometimes it takes an entire lifetime to forgive someone, depending on the wound, how deep it is. but it's something that it's necessary to start working on, because we know about the law of responsibility after the grave. And when we participate in the mediumistic meeting and we see spirits suffering because they have been unable to forgive, we see the suffering, the hellish situation they find themselves in after physical death. So benevolence and indulgence. Benevolence as in being kind, and indulgent as in understanding that as much as we expect people to understand our frailties, we also understand other people's frailties, and we try to put that into action. So going back here, watch your course and follow the way of the truth. He tells us, silence your jealousies, your discords. Work together so that Jesus can return and find the work complete. And that's one of the greatest things. It's as if Erastus would know what was going to happen with the Spiritist movement, because we let sometimes the state of competition and pride take over. So jealousy and discord takes over the work of the Spiritist. And that's something that we have to be aware. And I love this, amplify love, amplify, so that as much as love can be amplified, it would be able to silence the jealousies and discord that often takes over ourselves. When we see a calling like this, we see, especially right here on this answer, that all of this kind of ideas that they give us, the characteristics of those that are on the righteous path, on the good path, on the path of progress, spiritual progress, we see that it's not entailed only to those that are engaged in the Spiritist work, but anybody who calls themselves a Spiritist. It takes a while for us to understand this, because what we find is that the Spiritist, the true Spiritist, is going to be the one who is going to be actively putting in practice the one mandate that came from Christ, to love one's neighbor as oneself. So yesterday, Marcelo and I were reading something. It said, find something that will give you pain in your heart and work, do anything you possibly can to make sure that you don't inflict that into someone else. It's no longer about doing unto others what we would wish them to do to us. It's not doing unto others what we would not wish others to do unto us. And if for all of us were able to just take a step back and consider our actions in this manner, we can start envisioning the kind of world that we would live in, a very important one. The book On the Way to the Light is a book that we highly recommend the reading of, if you haven't read it yet. It's a very significant book. And there is a chapter in there that is chapter 3, called The Adamic Race. And they talk about the Capella system, and they talk about the exiled, those who were exiled from that specific world in the Capella system. It's called A World in Transition. Emmanuel tells us that many thousands of years ago, one of Capella's planets, which resembled Earth in many ways today, reached the culmination of one of its extraordinary evolutionary cycles. Let's talk about this. We know that there are many mentions in the Father's homes. We read that in the Gospels, and we see this in the Spiritist philosophy also, talking about the different inhabited or plurality of inhabited worlds out there in different stages of evolution. Earth right now is a world of trials and atonements or expiations, transitioning to a world of regeneration. A world of regeneration is going to be a place that is not yet free of difficulties or suffering, but that it's going to offer spirits a moment of rest. While incarnated, there will still be suffering, there will still be illnesses, but not as much as a world of trials and expiations. We are at the apex, transitioning. This is what happened to this planet that resembled Earth in many ways, many thousand years ago. This is not science fiction. This is a very interesting book that was channeled by Ch.XX, by the Spirit Emmanuel. The final struggles of a long perfecting process were being finalized, just as is now happening with you regarding the anticipated transition of the 20th century. So this was brought on in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, 40s or 50s. We are now in the 21st century. So this gives an idea how far we have come at this twilight of civilization. And here's where he gets to the point. Several million rebellious spirits were living there on the pathway of general evolution, making it difficult to consolidate the hard-earned gains of those people full of compassion and virtue. So the planet, resembling Earth, was filled with beings, human beings. Many of them had already been able to establish within their heart the kingdom of heaven, as Christ tried to explain to us, building the kingdom of heaven within. But several million other spirits were still not there. They still had not evolved that much, creating all sorts of chaos, wars, rages. He goes on to say, an act of widespread cleansing would banish those rebellious spirits from the humanity that had aligned itself with perpetual harmony for the construction of its lofty endeavors. The great spirit communities, directors of the cosmos, let's talk about this for a second. We've been told that the governor of our planet, the one who handles our affairs, the one who is responsible for each one of us is Jesus, director of the cosmos. So they talk about here how great spirit communities, directors of the cosmos, decided to send those that were no longer aligned with benevolence, with indulgence, with forgiveness, with the ability to amplify love. So they decided to take those spirits and send them to our planet thousands of years ago. Our planet is home to rebellious spirits that were not aligned with the moment of transition of one of the planets of Capella. So they came to Earth. They were given a chance to put forth their intellectual evolvement, because we evolve intellectually and morally. The thing is that the wings that allow us to ascend higher and higher must be developed fully, both of them, not just one. Otherwise, we'd be flying like this, right? We wouldn't fly well. So the intellectual wing was really well developed. The moral, not so much. So they were sent here not only to progress, to evolve, but also to assist the people of the earth. When we see the pyramids and creations that were brought here, a lot of people question, how were these people able to do that? Highly intellectually evolved spirits, not so much morally. So they were invited to come here, where they would learn to accomplish great conquest of the soul, while at the same time assisting the progress of their less evolved brothers and sisters. So they were exiled to Earth. The reason why this study is significant for us is because it's happening now again. The story repeats itself in different planets, and here we are. Do we want to be part of the workers who had been invited and put the work forward to partake in inheriting this earth, or do we want to be exiled to another one? What does inherit the earth means? Christ said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth. What does it mean? It means those that are aligned in a common vibration, a common evolvement. Everybody's aligned with what makes up a planet of regeneration. It's a matter of frequency and vibrations. If my spirit is not aligned, does not vibrate, does not resonate with the spiritual condition of the planet, I can't live in it. It's scientific. So we will be invited to live at a planet that is accommodating to our needs, a new school, if you will. This is truly beautiful, because when we consider all of this that the spirits bring us, talking about a sublime duty to respond to Christ's calling, it's out of love for us. It's not just say suffer a lot, work a lot. There is a mega benefit that we need to start understanding, so that Spiritism can become a consoling aspect of it. Why do all of this work when I see so much evil happening in the world? Why should I do good when people are constantly backstabbing me? Why be this way when I see completely the opposite in the world? Because in the end, it's not about them. It's about us. And hopefully others will see our efforts and try to follow the same way. So, if painful collective expiations are foretelling the time of the final woes of the apocalypse, spirituality must get involved in the accomplishments of physical humankind and enable them to be used for the good of our humanity. So the things that today bother us, the wars, the rages, the battles, that often begin on a small scale at home, the bombs of discord, the kind of destruction that we do to others using words, it's a time where we see that spirituality is going to get involved. It's going to send situations that is going to alert us and show us exactly where we want to be. On its mission as a consoler, Spiritism is the support of the world in this century. It is here. We get people talking to us all the time about how awful our planet is. Is it getting better or is it getting worse? So Divaldo will say that it's getting better. It's just that the bad, the evil makes a bigger bang than the goodness does. It is up to us to look to see where the goodness is, to amplify that noise. Because the good and love is contagious. It contaminates people. It's inevitable that we don't get touched by it and try to participate. So we are on the 2nd day of December. It's the greatest month of the year. It's the one that, for some reason, we think more vividly of Christ. The psychosphere of our planet changes. Because when we think about him, we connect. And when we connect, we modify the very atmosphere that we live in a very small scale. Collectively, we can't even grasp and start to understand. There's no greater sacrifice that we can do right now. I mean, for the one who on a cross said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know not what they do. The greatest sacrifice that we can do is just stop and look inside and see what is it that I can give him for all of the investments that he has made on my behalf. Christ has invested on each one of us. The kind of knowledge that we have, the kind of life that we have, the kind of things that make us happy, that show us that God truly is in control. That God truly is looking out for each one of his children. We need to stop and start analyzing and start understanding a little bit more about what it is that Spiritism can offer us. In Spiritism's wellspring of enlightenment, humankind will be able to drink the crystalline water of the consoling truths of heaven, enabling souls to prepare for a new age. The time has come when the forces of evil will be compelled to give up their final strongholds of dominion on earth. So they say, don't worry, dictators, armies, economic dominance of strong over weak, unpredictable and unconscious masses, inglorious wars and secular organizations will pass away like the vertigo of a nightmare. And things will get better. And as the workers of the last hour, it's going to be up to each one of us, workers that the Spirit is sent or not, to start plowing away fear. When we see people posting things on Facebook to try to create terrorism, you know how some people do that to scare the masses? Do the opposite. Bring a consoling message of Spiritism so that people don't feel afraid. Cultivate seeds of hope. Hope is the one thing that misses in people's life, that drives them to insanity, to suicide, direct or indirect, towards drug use, towards alcoholism. We are spiritists, and there's nothing more beautiful than knowing that we have the power to change people's lives, whether it's 1 or 5, whatever it is. Use the power that Spiritism has. We have books, thousands of books that console, that enlighten. Start with the gospel according to Spiritism. Help dry the tears, or utilize the tears that you see to try to plant hope. This is what the owner of the vineyard expects for us, because the Spirit of truth tells us that at this very moment, God is taking a census of his faithful servants and is taking note of those who only have the appearance of devotion, so that they may not usurp the wages of the courageous servants, because it is for those who do not recoil before their tasks that God will entrust the most difficult position in the great work of regeneration through Spiritism. And these words will be fulfilled. The first will be the last, and the last will be the first in the kingdom of heaven. If we are ever caught in a position where we feel we are being judged for the work that we are doing, we can very well remember this here. This isn't a message of the book, Our Daily Bread. Jesus knows the good worker, and that is enough. We've all been invited. It's up to each one of us to accept the very sublime invitation and get to work. With this, I thank you very much for the attention. And we have been requested to utilize the moment right now to do a collective passes with a prayer. And so I invite each one here at this very moment to awaken even more the potentialities of the soul, opening our spirits to the healing energies that surround us at this time, evoking the presence of our beloved Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, the Doctor of Love, and our Master Jesus, truly giving ourselves over to the loving arms that embrace us at this time, fully knowledgeable of our doubts, difficulties, the troubles that we may be facing, but also reminding us of the greatness that we have within, and how much we have been given and how much we can give back. Let us ask our Master Jesus to continue guiding us through his missionaries of love, our spirit guides. Let us thank him for being that very bright beacon of light in the dark night. Let us also praise him for showing us daily through the sun rays, through flowers that blossom, through a kind smile of a stranger, through the accidental blessings that come our way. Let us praise him in gratitude for this, for the Spiritist philosophy, science, and religion that shows us that there is no chaos in the world, that we can partake in the betterment of it, that we are able to fulfill the responsibilities and duties bestowed upon us prior to reincarnation, and being thankful in the knowledge that we are never alone, that while it may seem so, we can silence and go inside the temple of our own hearts and hear the echo voices of those who watch over us ever so closely in the spirit world and saying, be faithful and carry on. Go and be strong. Bless this home, the spiritual and incarnate workers that are here, and all of the surrounding areas, wherever they may be a troubled heart, may the light that emanates from this place guide and reach them, bringing them calm and comfort and consolation. And remind us to be a true example of a spiritist out into the world, much needed of consolation and hope. Thank you so much, and so be.